Okay, good morning, everyone.
Afternoon. Every time.
Afternoon, even. Sorry. Yeah, this day, that day, what day? I don't know. So we're just going to give it a minute. Let the last stragglers join in. Great to see so many people again, and we're going to run through some NLP today. So we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. Feel free to say hi in the chat. All my life.
Or not, in that case, maybe.
Yeah, or not. Yeah.
A lot of messages there, folks. Someone's manager is going to be very impressed that they managed to get on the system. So that's got to be a pay rise or something.
That's definitely a good thing. All right, brilliant. I think probably to maximize the time, and there's quite a lot in this one, we better get started. So good afternoon. I'm Andy Sanford from We Are Lean and Agile, and we do processes. So this is all going to be Lenny today. So Lenny.
Hello, welcome back for some names. I think we've got a few new people joining us, which is great. So thank you for sharing the original video. If you've not had a chance to have a look at Control Dartboard, definitely worth having a look at it. Some of what we're referencing today, there is a bit of an overlap between the two models. So conscious as I am that we are limited for time, I don't want to kind of go back too much. So if you've not had the chance to have a look at it, I would definitely have a look on the system and just have a check. So for those of you that haven't seen me before, my name is Lenny Bedian. I am the owner and director of BW Training. We deliver training and coaching predominantly to local government, but increasingly to private sector and other areas as well. So very nice to be back. Thank you.
Sorry, just replying to the chat. If people are struggling with sound, you just need to be looking at what microphone you're using. So you can go to the sound settings and have a look at the microphone that it's actually using and set that as a default.
Hopefully that will resolve it. There we go. So just found sound, right click and turn the audio on.
Yeah, always an advantage. There you go. That's a good thing. Okay, so just going to crack on. Hopefully people can get their sound sorted there. We're just going to go through a quick overview of the way we're going to do the webinar today. Very similar to the last one. We're going to start with a poll. So first up, same poll as last week. How are you feeling today? And I'm just going to start that one off for you right now. Hopefully you'll see that pop up on your screen, and hopefully we'll start to see some, there we go. We're seeing some votes dropping in. So great, keep voting. Lots of happy people today. Still lots of meh people as well. So next up, we're going to interact with the chat as well. So we have another poll here just to understand your current knowledge of NLP. So let's have a go with that one quickly. And also, after you've done the voting on that one, if you would like to have a say in the chat there, if there's anything in particular you'd like from Lenny in these sessions, then just let us know in the chat there. And same as last time, we're going to have presentations going on, but in the handouts tab, there are a number of handouts, including the slides for this. Lenny will talk a little bit more about those handouts as she does her stuff. And Lenny.
Just before we get into the next sessions, I'm conscious because I'm, as I've said before, I'm not really a techno dude. And I'm reminded that last time you guys are about 10 seconds behind us. So this is a live feed. There is a little bit of buffer on it. So I'm conscious that sometimes when we ask a question, we may have moved on before you have the opportunity to answer it. If there are questions as we go through that you would like me to answer, if you have concerns around the descriptions of what I'm talking about, or if you'd like some specific examples or anything at all that is a question that you'd like answering, please do put it in the chat. I'm trying to sort of keep an eye on the chat as well as look at the slides and talk at the same time. So if I miss it and it's a really important question, type it again, because I will do my best to pick up on them. For those of you that were here last time we did this, I do like the interaction. It's really important. So ask questions, throw a grenade in, be difficult. It's great for me because that's what I love to do in a training environment. So it's nice to keep it as real for me as possible. So just to pick up on the topics that we're going to be looking at, we've decided to just go for it and book in a series of stuff. They all link together. There's some really good threads throughout it. So obviously last time we did control dartboard. Today we're looking at the wonderful world of NLP, or a very small fraction of it. Something that came out from our polls last time with people talking around managing change. So I thought it might be useful to do some stuff around a process called the change cycle, which you may have seen before, some coping strategies around change. So there's that one, is our next one in 2 weeks' time. Then we thought we'd do sort of an open space one, which is basically a blank piece of paper. So Andy and I will get on here, we'll put an hour in, we'll invite you guys to come along, and then we'll just run it as a Q&A. So you can ask me anything really, obviously training related, and then I'll do my best to either give you the information there and then, or at the very least make available some handouts or some further videos or further reading. So that's the open space. We're going to look at emotional intelligence and well-being and the connection between the two. Some really interesting research around that. You'll get the opportunity to do a little questionnaire and have a little bit of self-diagnosis. So that's quite good fun. I thought it would be useful to do some stuff around setting goals, particularly when we feel perhaps a little bit lacking anchors at the moment. We're sort of having to do things quite self-directed. So there's something for me about how we keep ourselves on track with that. And then the last one is quite work specific, I guess. And I'm aware some of you are on here without necessarily having a work driver. And that's more about team cohesion and how you can use some of the techniques we've talked about over the series of 7 or 8 workshops in a team dynamic, and how you might be able to use them in a sort of constructive way moving forward. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm just conscious, and I don't know whether it's happened by accident or whether something has happened. Our chat appears to have stopped. Now, it may well be that you're all just very much engrossed in my wonderful face and my soothing tone, in which case that's absolutely fine. But I'm wondering if you could just test out your chat for me, maybe just put a couple of bits in, a hello or a goodbye or a wave or a whatever. Again, I am aware you're a little bit behind us, so okay, yeah, it looks like it is. Okay, great, thank you guys. I just wanted to check. Brilliant. Okay, so just going to hand back very quickly to Andy, and then I'll crack on with the information around NLP. Thank you.
Brilliant. So just to reiterate, same as last time, this will be available on demand. Feel free to share it with any of your colleagues, as will all of the series. We've got some other webinars up there, so do have a look at our channel. We've got some stuff on Beekeeper, some stuff on data visualization, some stuff on, you'll be surprised to understand, process improvement. So just have a look at bit.ly/lean and agile webinars, and all of our webinars, our free webinars, are up there for you. So back to you, Lenny.
Cool. Okay, so please do ask questions. Please do kind of make sure you're clear with what I'm talking about. We have, I think it's 4 handouts made available to you. I'll reference them as we go through. If you've got any questions, type them in the chat and I'll do my best to pick up on them as we go through. So one of the first questions you were asked, or Andy mentioned, is around what your kind of current level of NLP knowledge is. Not seeing the poll specifically on that, but I'm wondering, does anyone have a view about NLP? Has anyone heard of it before? Just to give you a minute or two to perhaps, or maybe to think about what it is you'd like to get out of this session, if there is something specific useful for me to kind of maybe tailor it a bit towards that. So I'll just give you a minute because I know you're a little bit behind us. So.
Silence there is golden, isn't it, Lenny?
Oh, I think it's so difficult because I think people are possibly just trying to catch us up. I'll go on if as and when I see stuff coming up. So Sally, yeah, great, thank you. Bit of a refresher. As and when I see things coming up, keep typing them, keep putting them in there. I'll do my best. So, okay. A few of you are saying it's about understanding NLP, and that's kind of where we're going to start. We are doing a very, very small element of NLP. There's a lot of people, I can see a friend and colleague here talking about having done it herself and how it can help you focus and be so positive. I got into NLP whilst I was working at Torbay Council, long time been a trainer, many, many years, sort of dabbled with coaching, but never really got into it formally. And got the opportunity fortuitously to do an NLP practitioner course, which was a 12-day program. And it absolutely blew my mind. I've never known anything like it. And it's one of those things, it's linked to cognitive behavioral therapy, it's linked to emotional freedom techniques. So there's, you could argue, and I have had many a discussion with people, how much of it is based in science, how much of it is based in fact. And there's a bit of me that kind of goes, well, perhaps not. Perhaps not. What I would say is, as a practitioner, as someone using coaching in both training, NLP in both training and coaching every single day, you can't argue with what you see happen when people get the concepts of NLP. It's very much about encouraging people to take responsibility for what they're doing, how they're doing it, and the reality that they're creating. So yeah, lots of stuff here around well-being, using it in relationships, communication. There's tons of stuff around it. So I'm going to do my level best in 40 minutes to give you as much of information as I can. Part of one of the handouts, or actually apologies, towards the end of the slides, there is a reading list suggestion. And also to say that this is but a taste of what we do with NLP. Usually if I'm doing this model as part of an NLP program, it takes me half a day to go through this model. And we're going to whip through it in 40 minutes. So you're not going to get everything, but hopefully you will get a flavour for it. And if you find it even vaguely interesting as I do, you'll want to find out more about it. So let's get into what NLP actually means. I think the big thing for me is, this is one of my favorite quotes. There is no such thing as reality, only our perception of it. The reality is the reality we create. You can go to a meeting, can't you? 4 of you go to the same meeting. 1 of you comes out and goes, what the hell was that all about? 3 of you come out, that was amazing, loved it, it was brilliant. Well, what's different then? Well, what tends to be different is the view that that individual has, or the other individuals have, on what was happening, on how it was received, on just basically their reality of the situation. So Becky Mallory, NLP for Rookies, highly recommended. It's a book I reference later on, but it's a really interesting one. And I love that quote, actually, what is my reality? What am I creating for myself? And we'll go through that in a bit more detail. So often people ask me, what does it mean then? It's one of those kind of acronyms, but not necessarily one we perhaps understand the kind of nuances around. So as you'll see from this slide, NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming, but I want to go through each one kind of separately so we can separate them out. So neuro relates to the brain, kind of how we produce our results. So we take in information all the time, and we're going to go through some stats around it, which will blow your mind, I'm sure. And we're constantly processing sensory information. What we need is our brains need to make sense of that information. So it needs to kind of make logical, kind of rational certain things. But there's a huge amount of information coming in. So fantastic as our brains are, there comes a point at which our brains will go, well, this is just too much. I'm just dealing with too much stuff here. And there is a figure around what we're able to deal with, which I'll cover off with you later on. So the neuro bit of neuro-linguistic programming relates to our thinking, our brain, our processing kind of way in which we go about doing things. Okay. So that's the neuro bit. Linguistic, how we communicate thoughts to ourselves and to others. As a coach, you don't know what someone's thinking because you don't know. You never know. And in fact, arguably forget as a coach. In life, you don't know what someone's thinking. What you absolutely can get a sense of from their language is what they're thinking. So very often people in coaching, when they come to see me, will say that they want to be more something, more assertive, more confident, more whatever it might be. And the key bit for me in that statement is the word more, because the word more implies subconsciously there must be some there. If there wasn't some there, why would we use the word more? We would just say, I want to be confident. I want to be assertive. Now, the individual using that language may not have consciously used the word more. In fact, most times they don't consciously use it. And it's not until you point it out that it makes them think, oh, hang on, maybe I have. Maybe I am assertive at home or in different scenarios. What we're looking to do with NLP is to open up the choices and possibilities. What we're very good at doing, particularly when we're in a bit of a funk, is shutting down those choices and possibilities. So we're only left with stuff that's unappealing or unhelpful. What we look to do using NLP is to open up that thinking, is to open up those possibilities so that we can have different choices. Even if my choice is still to be a miserable git, it's done through choice and not just because that's what I'm doing to myself. So we'll get into all this as we go through the model in a bit more detail. So linguistic, fascinating, love it, big part of NLP. Big fascination for me personally is the language around NLP. The last bit, the programming bit, is how our brain reacts in terms of all those internal processes and how we then produce that in terms of behavior. So, for example, if my neuro is thinking, I don't know, I really hate being shut in the house all day long on lockdown, whatever you want to call it, I may use that language with friends, with others, in social media. And then generally speaking, my behavior will reflect that I don't like being here. And guess what? I don't like being here because that's the results I get back. One of my favorite NLP phrases is, if what you're doing isn't working, do something different. Now, it's not an NLP phrase. It's I believe, I can't remember who came up with it. Hoover, someone will tell me, I'm sure. If what you're doing isn't working, do something different. It's based on Einstein's definition of insanity. If we carry on doing the same thing, we're going to carry on getting the same results. What NLP encourages us to do is to ask ourselves, are the results I'm getting what I want? And if not, what can I do differently? Because if I just keep doing this, I'm just going to keep getting this. Now, often what a lot of people will say to me in training is, well, why should I? Why should I change to accommodate the fact that Andy's a pain in my bum? Why should I change me to accommodate him? My challenge always is, what will happen if you don't? Because Andy doesn't go home at the end of the day with a knot in his stomach. Andy doesn't speak to his partner, his wife, his next door neighbor, his tennis coach about this person winding him up. You do. So at the end of the day, if it's you that's affected by this other person's behavior, then there is some inherent benefit in doing something differently. Not for Andy, but for you. One of my favorite NLP phrases, one of the favorite questions I will often ask somebody is, what cost? At what cost to you? Or I will often ask myself, at what cost to me? If I'm doing something and it's resulting in a set of circumstances that are not helpful, what impact is that having on me? Which sounds tremendously selfish. But actually, if I'm not in a good place, all my relationships suffer as a consequence anyway. So neuro, the thinking, linguistic, the language, programming, the behavior, and the results that we get back. We're going to be looking at a model that sort of captures all of these. And you could spend, normally, as I say, I would do half a day on it. You could spend 3 days on it. It's a hugely complex model. So poor old Andy is going to have to try and keep up with me with the IT on this one because it's very kind of fiddly. You do have a handout for this in the handouts bit. If I could ask you to kind of avoid the temptation to look at it for now, because then you'll be distracted by that and you won't be listening to me. But you do have it. So you've got that as a resource ready. So this model is based on some work by a chap called Tad James. And Tad James was one of the early researchers around NLP and did a lot of work into fundamentally what part NLP plays in communication. So this is our brains, our neuro bit. We start off, as you look on the right-hand side of the model, we start off with what we call the external event. Now, the external event is what it is that's happening around us. So what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're listening to, how we're feeling. And the phrase I will often say in training is how the big toe feels on your foot inside of your shoe, on your right foot, only your right foot, mind. Are you thinking about that now? Presumably you weren't doing so before I just invited you to. So there's all sorts of things that are happening around us all the time. The question is, what are we paying attention to at any given point in time? Because what we tend to be paying attention to is the thing that we deem to be important. So you're probably not thinking about your big toe on your right foot, although Sally now is, bless her. She said that training from me before I asked you to, because it wasn't relevant. Unless you've got an ingrown toenail, something really bad is happening, you're probably not paying much attention to the big toe on your right foot. The minute I've asked you to, it suddenly becomes important, and then it's something you focus on. Brilliant example of this is, when you, nice fluffy slippers, when you've decided you want to buy a new type of car and you know what type of car you want to buy. So I'm going to get a Volvo, a Mini, a Skoda or whatever. Everywhere you drive, all you see is that car. That's my car. That's the car I'm getting. I've seen my car. I'm saying that's the one. And you point it out to everyone and you notice every example of it. Well, why? Because it's important, because at that point in time, it's something you're focusing on and your brain is far more attuned to it, far more looking out for it. So if you apply that to life, if I think everything's rubbish, I am likely to be seeing lots of examples of everything being rubbish because my brain is telling me at that point in time, that's important. Equally, if I look for positives, if I look for things to be of a positive nature, I will tend to see examples of those because I'm looking for them. So this is where we get our reality. Actually, am I creating a reality that is a true reality? Well, you could argue there's no such thing as a true reality. And you don't want it because everyone, oh yeah, that's true. And once you got it, no, you don't want it because everyone's got it. One of my favorite things about this is actually, what am I paying attention to selectively at that point in time? And for me, there's 3 ways to use this model. There's the interest. I hope you find it interesting. I'm sure you will. The second one is, if I know what I'm doing myself, I can at the very least become aware of it. And I would argue, as an NLP practitioner, you can manage it, you can change it, you can do something different. But the third example of using this is actually using it with other people. So I use this model when I'm training coaches, because as a coach, understanding what somebody's doing in their thinking is extremely useful to ask the right questions, to get them to just stop and think. When we're on an emotional train, it's very hard to put the brakes on. Coaching very often is about just pulling people back a little bit and going, hang on a minute, what might be different if things were different? So I'm going to share with you some coaching questions which you can use on yourself, although arguably it's quite hard to coach yourself. You can use at home. You can use at work, you can use in social situations, professional situations, loads of different examples. And again, you've got this in your handout, so don't worry too much about keeping up. So in terms of the external event, we take in, believe it or not, somewhere in the region of 134 bits of sensory information every single second. 134 bits of sensory information every single second. Now, in terms of managing that amount of information, our brains are going, I don't need to know that someone in a blue coat just walked past my house. I don't need to know how the big toe feels on my right foot. I don't need to know that there's 47 Volvos of the same colour that I'm going to get. I don't need to know, believe it or not, that the outline of my nose is permanently in my line of sight, as is everybody's. The shadow of your nose is always visible. You don't notice it because you don't need to notice it. It's not important, it's not relevant, and it's too much information. So what our brains have to do is to get these 134 bits of information down to plus or minus 7 bits of information. So on a bad day, I've had no sleep, I've got backache, and I've got a ton of work to do, -2. I might go down to 5 bits of information. On a good day, I've had lots of sleep, I know what I'm doing, I'm buzzing, I might be able to go up to +2. So that makes it 9 bits of information. But generally speaking, we can deal with about 7 bits of information at any point in time. Any more than that, and it becomes confusing, becomes difficult for us to filter things out, and we lose information. So what our brains are very good at doing is what we call filtering information. Now, I'm just going to share with you the 3 main filters. There are lots more filters, but we're just going to look at the 3 main ones in terms of time. So the first one we're looking at is a filter we call a deletion. As the name would suggest, what a deletion does is it just deletes whole bits of information that are either not relevant, not important, not useful. So let me give you an example. Well, the outline of the nose of the site of your nose. Do you need to know about it? Not really. So your brain doesn't really focus on it on a day-to-day basis. It deletes it. It's not important. It's not relevant at this point in time. Therefore, I don't need that information. The problem with all the filters is sometimes the stuff that we get rid of is actually the stuff that we should be aware of. So actually, they can sometimes be quite unhelpful in terms of how our brains process reality. So with a deletion, we're going to come on to this in a bit more detail with a separate slide in a minute, but deletions essentially mean we shut down our choices. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I don't want to go into it in too much detail without the information in front of us. So let's leave that one there for now. Again, please, if you've got any questions, if I'm going too quickly, if anything has passed you by, please shove them in the chat for me. So next one then, distortions. I did 12 days training on NLP. We did hundreds of models. We did this word, as I recall, about 20 minutes. And for me personally, this was the biggest shift in my thinking out of a whole 12-day course. I was very good at distorting. Distortions mean fundamentally creating our own reality. So we see an example of something and we put our own meaning on what that is. So for example, I don't know, my boss comes in the morning and doesn't say hello to me. My immediate thought may well be, they're upset with me. I've done something wrong. I'm in trouble. Something is happening because they didn't say hello to me. And that may well be true. That may well be the case. It could also be that they didn't say hello to you because they saw you were busy working, or they had 1,000,001 other things on their mind, or they have many other things going on, and saying hello to you is not high on the... In other words, it's how you view and what meaning you place on that behavior that makes it real. So how do I stop myself doing that? We've got some brilliant techniques on that. So again, we've got a slide for that. I'll come back to that one. Yeah, I've just had a comment in the comments bit about the deletion equals the dump valve. That's exactly it. It is that kind of, I don't need this, not relevant, I'm going to get rid of it. The problem is sometimes the stuff we dump is really unhelpful. And I'll explain that when we get to the other slide. So deletions essentially get rid of information. Distortions, I see something and I put my own meaning on it. The main of the three that we're looking at is something we call generalizations. Generalizations are extremely useful because, generally speaking, they can help us learn. So, for example, I'm on my whole second webinar now. I generally know how this stuff works. You know, you press a button, you sit in front of it, you change your t-shirt about 4 times just to make sure it highlights your face. That's generally how a webinar works. And now I'm an old hand now. Generally, I know. Now, the problem will be the minute anything goes wrong, I won't have a bit in my brain that goes, I know how this works now. I know how this works, because I don't know how that works. So generalizations are a really good way of us learning something very quickly. The problem is sometimes the stuff we generalize is stuff that is not necessarily based on many experiences, but maybe based on 1 or 2, and we create a rule that might not necessarily be the truth or might not necessarily be the case. So I will cover that off with you in a little bit more detail. Really interesting, and I obviously won't reveal too much here, but to see people commenting about, yeah, I've got a person like that in my life, and they are a bit standoffish, so they are a bit like this. It's great that you're having that thinking, because the bottom line is are they doing what you think they're doing, or is this just a reality you've created without any evidence? You could argue you're just creating a reality with absolutely nothing in which to no foundations in which to base that reality. So we'll go through that in a sec, but thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. So I always think of the filters as kind of like our sieve, like a colander. So all this 132 bits of information, 134, come into my brain. My brain then goes through a generalization, a deletion, and a distortion process, as well as many other filters which are on your handout, but we haven't got time to cover today. And what I'm left with is then the salient 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2, 7 bits. And what they do is they then form what we call an internal representation. Now, an internal representation is essentially how the information we're left with then forms itself in our minds. And there are actually 6, but 4 main ways that information can represent itself. So we can have a preference around something we call being visual. So we can have a visual preference. So those of you that perhaps are, I don't know, if you're going to buy something in a shop, you picture what it will look like in your house. Or if you are reading a map, do you prefer to look at the map or do you prefer to hear it? So those of you with a visual preference, and what I've put in the handout is a questionnaire that you can find out what your representational system is. So, for example, if you are very visual and you're communicating with someone who's not visual, you're going to want to see them because you're visual. If they're not visual, they're not going to be bothered about seeing you. So understanding where the differences are around people's representational systems can be extremely useful for building rapport, maintaining good communication relationships. So it's definitely worth having a look at that one. The handout's in there. It's got all the information you need. We can also have what we call an auditory preference. So I guess, as the name would suggest, it's what people hear. So people with an auditory preference, they like to kind of bounce ideas off people. Often there'll be people who talk out loud to themselves because they kind of need to hear it. Someone with an auditory preference, very much about how somebody sounds. So if your tone of voice is a bit off or something doesn't sound right, that will be a kind of auditory preference. People with a kinesthetic preference tends to be more feeling. So kinesthetic is not just emotionally feeling, but tactile too. So people with a kinesthetic preference, if they're buying something, will often sort of feel the material and just want to feel it, and very sensory, very kind of activists in their nature. So they like to have a go, just see how it feels. And the last one, self-talk's a really interesting one. Those of you with children of school age will probably have heard of VAK before. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic is big in schools now and has been. The self-talk is an interesting one because that tends to get added on more later on. The self-talk is something we call auditory digital. And auditory digitals will tend to want to make sense of something. So the way in which they do that is they internalize their thinking. So someone with an auditory digital preference will have a whole conversation in their heads that they will swear blind they've had with you, but they've never actually done so because they've just done. I'm going to guess, Mr. Sanford, there's an element of that with you. When we get into things like what professions sit around some of these preferences. So the self-talk one, IT, technical type work, because it needs to make sense. It needs to be logical. I have to make sense of it and figure it out. So someone with an auditory digital preference, if your partner has ever said to you, or your significant other has ever said to you, you haven't told me that, and you go, yes, I have. I would argue if you're auditory digital, they're probably right. Because auditory digitals, they will just swear they've had a real conversation that never actually left their minds or their mouths. So it can be quite useful because if you know that about someone, you can sort of, and I would do these with your teams, do these with your families, get people to do the questionnaire because it just helps. I don't have to say you're being rude. I can say, have you done this in your head and not told me? My wife is very auditory digital. So she'll start a conversation halfway through and I'll go, I know you think I've been involved in this conversation, but I honestly haven't. And I don't know what you're talking about. Good positive thing is we're both NLP trained coaches, so we both understand the concept, so it's not too bad. There's a lot of people here saying I can't listen, I have to look at it. Someone saying I do both. Yeah, chances are you do. Auditory and visual, very unusual to have both as a preference. You would usually have one or the other. No, you're not crazy. It's fine. Well, you might be. It's not for me to say, but as far as the NLP stuff is concerned, you're not. Really interesting with sat navs, actually. Someone's just commented about sat nav. Have you noticed when you're going somewhere you've never been before, do you notice that when you get closer to your destination, whether you've got a sat nav on or not, you turn the stereo down? You ever noticed that? The reason for that is, again, our brains are trying to deal with plus or minus 7 bits of information. And the more I can minimize the amount of information coming into my head, the more I can concentrate. So next time you do it, you may not drive very much for the next few months, but when you do, tend to turn it down. Yeah, a few people are saying they do. So visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and self-talk are ways in which what we're left with in our sieve represents itself within us. Now, why do we need to know that? Well, predominantly we need to know that because we can manipulate that. So I'm quite visual. So if I'm driving to a training course that I've never done before, new company, new organization, new place, I don't know what they're going to be like. They don't know me. I don't know them. I will start and I will consciously have a visualization in my head. So I'll see smiley faces. I'll see a really well-lit room. I see loads of color in my head. When I walk into the room, this is going to sound a bit talking about what someone said I'd say, sound crazy. A little fireworks go off. Now, none of this happens. I'm very aware none of this happens. But with all of this happening in my head, I'm so energized by the time I walk through the door that almost whatever happens, I'm ready for it. Now, what I also know is my least useful preference is self-talk. And if I start with self-talk, it goes horribly wrong because I'll say to myself, they probably don't want to be there. They don't know me. They probably think I'm rubbish. They're not going to be interested. I'm dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. What's she all about? I don't do power. And I have all this internal dialogue. And I know that it's really unhelpful for me to have that as my starting point. So you can manipulate whichever of these stronger preferences you have. So understanding which is your strongest preference can be extremely useful. Have a look in the handouts when we're done. There's loads of handouts for this one. Unlike Control Dartboard, which was just Control Dartboard, there's tons on this one. So take them away, download them, monkey around with them, play with them. Definitely have a look at your preference and what that is. Now, once all this stuff has happened, it leads to what we call our state. Tad James was American, so state. I would say frame of mind, mood even. And there are days where I have to remind myself to choose my state. So some days I have to consciously work on, okay, what is your thinking here? We're going to do, when we do well-being later on, we're going to be talking about what's your script for the day? What do you wake up with? Because that can often set the tone for the whole day. But you can manage your state. You can change your state at any given time, your mood at any given time. The question is, the more aware of it you can become, the easier it is to manipulate. Again, we'll do some on this later on. So your state, your frame of mind, your mood, your whatever you want to call it, can be affected by your physiology. So those of you that are now, I guess a lot of you are working from home, be conscious if you're sitting at the same desk for the same 2 hours on the same chair, your physiology will start to affect your state. So your bum will go numb, your back will hurt, you'll need to get up and stretch. So get up, wander around the house, inside or outside, just change your physiology, because changing your physiology can change your state, your mood, your frame of mind. Ultimately, your state will determine your behavior. So if I've deleted, distorted, and generalized to leave myself with something positive, and I've got a really nice positive visual image in my head, and my state and my mood is really positive, that will be my behavior, because that's what I've predetermined. If I've done the opposite, and all I've left myself with is rubbish, and I have a really dark, dingy, unpleasant visual representation, and my mood is terrible, and my back hurts, and my head is pounding, then that will tend to be reflected in my behavior as well. Ultimately, your behavior will determine the results that you get. So what NLP will say to us is, if the results that you're getting are not the results you want, what are you going to do differently? Because if you carry on doing what you've always done, there is a very strong argument for you will continue to get what you've always got. So the bit for me with NLP and why I love it is you can take or leave it. I can choose some days, as I shared with you on my Control Dartboard session, to be a right miserable git. And that's absolutely my choice. And I am a human being. And some days I just want to be like that. But what NLP has allowed me to do is to recognize how I'm doing it. And more importantly, how to undo it. Because actually, I would argue it's not helpful, the impact on me and those around me, to be carrying anger, frustration, anxiety, all of those horrible emotions physically and emotionally, well, certainly physically and physiologically, have a huge impact on your well-being. There's tons of research around it. So at what point am I going to start to say to myself, you're not being helpful here, you're not helping yourself, this is not useful, how are you going to do it differently? Well, part of that is understanding, if I'm deleting, if I'm distorting, if I'm generalizing, how do I get myself out of that? How do I stop myself doing that? So we're going to share some slides with you now, which is about each of those broken down into a little bit more detail. So we'll start off with deletions. So again, you'll have all this in handouts, so don't worry too much. I just want to make sure the principle makes sense. So deletions tend to be characterized when people use N''T language. So by that, I mean words like can't, isn't, won't, shouldn't, mustn't. Anything where you have that N''T in the phrase itself is a linguistic deletion. So if we could pop that up, Andy, just so people can see those words, that'd be great. So these are the sorts of words we're talking about. Now, what that means is we're limiting our choices. So, for example, if I say I can't do webinars, can't do them. What I'm leaving myself with in terms of my deletion is the only bit I'm leaving myself is with what I can't do, because in my head, I'm deleting the other possibility. So a deletion essentially means what you're getting rid of is the opposite of what you're thinking or what you're saying. So and-so won't change their behavior. What am I deleting? The possibility that they will. I can't do a webinar. What am I deleting? The possibility that I can. What else have we got here? Mustn't, shouldn't, isn't. Anything that is the opposite won't work. How many times I've heard that go into organizations and straight away I get told, well, it won't work. Well, what are we deleting? The possibility that it will. I'm not suggesting we should go into everything going, it will work. Everything will be amazing. This will happen. There's a brilliant author I may have mentioned to you last time, a guy called Damien Hughes, and he talks about an experience he had with the British Lions. And his mantra is very much positive mindset, very based in NLP. There's loads of NLP principles in it. And he regales a story of a time he was given a pep talk to the British Lions. And one of the big prop forwards came up to him afterwards and said, so what you're saying then is if I think 100% positive, 100% of the time I'm going to win. And his response was, well, no, you can't guarantee positivity from positive thinking. What you can guarantee is negative thinking will tend to lead to negative outcome. So it's not saying be naive about what's doable and achievable. What it is saying is, how is your thinking affecting your belief of whether or not you can do something? The brilliant phrase, I'm losing all my people today. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I think that might be Hoover. I get confused. Henry Ford, I think that one.
Ford, yeah.
Yeah, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it's so true. So how do we get ourselves out of it? Ask yourself a question. So what would happen if this was different then? So I can't do webinars. So what would happen if you could? Well, I'd be able to be eloquent. I could talk to people. So what would happen if you could? So-and-so won't change their behavior. What would happen if they did? What would that mean? Now, this question of all the questions, and I can almost see through chat, people going, that doesn't really make sense. It's probably a good thing that it doesn't really make sense. What we're looking to do is to get someone to stop and think. So almost by being an obscure question, somebody has to go, what would happen if what? I don't get it. So they've got to think. We know with the two sides of the brain, we have an emotional side of the brain and we have a logical, rational, adult side of the brain. When we're in problem solving, when we're in solution, when we're in positive outcome, we tend to be in adult thinking. When we're having a tantrum, when we're throwing our toys out the pram, when we're emotionally responding, we'll tend to be in child. So what we want is to talk to the adult, and the adult has to think. The adult has to make sense. The adult has to make things logical. So that's why some of these questions are a bit obscure, particularly the deletion question. But it's a really powerful one. Be brave. Try it. Try it at home. Try it on yourself. Try it on anybody. To which end, we would like to ask you, I believe, a little poll. Yeah, so are you aware of yourself using N''T language in the last few days? Have you used it? Are you conscious that you've used it? What sorts of things perhaps have you been saying to yourself in terms of, I don't know, isolation, homeschooling, whatever it might be? So just have a quick think. What, if anything, do you recognise in terms of you've been doing? I don't know whether I can see your polls on that one.
Very much yes, Lenny. Very high percentage.
Good.
Yes.
Good. At the risk of kind of setting you up here, I'd be a little bit concerned if anybody said absolutely not. Probably being not aware of it is a different thing. And again, the purpose for me of NLP and understanding NLP is to make myself more aware. So if you have done that, as comfortable as you are, what sort of things have you been using N''T language in? What sort of phrases, what sort of areas of your life have you tended to be using deletions? So what have you been saying can't happen, won't happen, shouldn't happen, isn't possible? And again, I'll just give you a minute or two. I'm not going to start thinking something. Oh, okay. So saying to myself, I can't do something, or I can't. Okay. And actually, if what you're starting to do is something that's unhelpful, then you wouldn't do it. But if it's helpful, then telling yourself you can't do it is just shutting down those choices. Oh, haven't got time. That's a really good one. Yeah, that's a great idea. So what would happen if you did have that time? What would you be able to get done? Now, what you might say is, well, I'd get some of it done. Okay, and in getting some of it done, how would that be different for you? What would feel different? So really, all we're looking to do with the questioning is just shift your thinking away from that, what you can't do, and just moving towards, well, what would be different if you could? Can't cope. That's a really interesting one. Language, again, I can't cope. Cope is a fascinating one to me. I had a lady on a course a while ago who said, I just don't care about my job anymore. I just don't care. I can't care about it anymore. This was someone who works in social care, around the NHS arena. This is someone who has to care. The nature of the job that they do is very much blood and guts in terms of, you're in it wholeheartedly. My question to them was, so what do you mean in terms of, I don't enjoy my job anymore. I just don't care anymore. And she said, well, what I do is I come in at the right time and I leave at the right time and I don't care anymore. I said, but is that about not caring, or is that about looking after yourself and your own well-being? So words like cope, to pick up on that word, is really interesting, because for me, coping is physically getting out of bed in the morning. And therefore, arguably, if you're doing that, you are coping. So what specifically can't you cope with? What does coping specifically mean? So we've got some here around delivering training through remote technology. Use it more in self-talk, and I'm much more positive with other people. That's fascinating. Physician, heal thyself. I can stand guilty of that. What I use with other people, and any of you that are watching me that know me know again this to be true. How we use it with others and how we use it with self is not always the same thing. And actually, it's very hard to self-coach. So sometimes you do need somebody else to kind of, do that, point that out to you. It's part of the reason we're sharing this with you, whether you're using it at home, whether you're using it at work, partner, next door neighbor. This is about making people more aware of what they're doing and the impact that it's having. Great. Thank you for sharing those. We'll ping them around when we're done. A little bit aware of our time. So we'll go on to the next one, which is distortions. My favorite because changing my thinking around this has just opened a whole new world up for me. Sorry, I just had the whole new world song ping around. I'm clearly a little bit more auditory than I realised, though. I've got, Peter Andre and what's her face? Katie Price. Anyway, I digress. Distortions. Distortions are characterised by X equals Y. So when this happens, it means that. So I've picked a random example, but I'm sure there's 101. The example I've given here is when I say no to people, it means they won't like me. So, sorry, Carl, I can't work out if you're saying, oh, no, that I've just given you the whole new world song in your head. I apologise if that is the case. So when I say no, it means they'll hate me. Before I did my training, and I use this example on everyone because it's a very powerful one. If I walked into a pub and people in the pub were laughing, people are laughing in a pub, my immediate distortion was they're laughing at me. They're laughing at my hair. They're laughing at my psoriasis. They're laughing at what I'm wearing. They're laughing at me. What that then meant was I had a miserable night in that pub because I'm looking over my shoulder the whole time going, everyone who's laughing is laughing at me, which is tremendously egocentric when you think about it. We are very good at making everything about us. And I hope to burst your bubble, but it just ain't. People just aren't that interested in you. You're just not that interesting. You are to yourself and the people who care about you. But people sitting in the pub are laughing at their mates. They're laughing at a stupid thing on their phone. And if they are laughing at you, you're not going to know anyway. Because unless you're going to go up to every single one of them and go, were you laughing at me? 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 Which you're not going to do. You have no evidence. You have no evidence. The only evidence you have is the evidence you've created in your head and at what cost to you. So if I walk into a pub now and people in the pub are laughing, my immediate thought is, this sounds amazing. Everybody's having a wicked night. Sounds like a really good atmosphere. I'm going to have a brilliant time. Now, nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. People were laughing before, they're laughing now. The only thing that's different is my reaction to what's happening. People pleaser, yeah, lots of that, definitely. Okay, there's a lot of people saying this is the key. This was the key for me. Distortions for me are enormous. And people say to me, and I understand why, you're very naive then, Lenny, because if every behavior that people exhibit, you're looking for a positive outcome from, it's a very naive way of looking at life. You must get taken for a bit of a mug. And I go, do you know what? Maybe I do, but I sleep well. I don't grind my teeth. I don't drink hardly at all anymore. I'm pretty contented in life. So therefore, yeah, okay, if it's naive, I'll accept that. But it's a naivety I'm prepared to live with because it benefits me to do so. There's a really nice phrase, and I try and weave it into a lot of my training because it just sticks with me. I think it was on Deal or No Deal, randomly. Anyway, and the phrase is, at the end of the journey, the pessimist will be right, but the optimist will have enjoyed the journey. Love that. Because make your choice. If you want to look for everything to be wrong in this world, crack on, and you will be proven right. Of course you will. If you want to enjoy it, why do this to yourself? And that's why, for me, if you took away 4 words from this whole series of webinars, and these were the only 4 words you took away, take these away, put them in your back pocket, and use them every single day. This question is so powerful. So, when you are distorting, ask yourself, I prefer the second of these 2 questions. How do I know that all these people in the pub are laughing at me? How do I know that if I say no to people, they're going to hate me? And if you don't like the how do you know, which for some of you might be a little bit touchy-feely, ask yourself a slightly different question. Excuse me. What evidence do I have? Where are the facts that what I'm thinking is actually true? Because there's a strong argument for, if I don't have facts, the only reality I'm creating is the one in my head. And how helpful is that to me? How helpful is that reality? Because you're responsible for your reality. Nobody else is. You are. And if you put it in there, you can take it out. You just need to understand, what have I done? How have I created this? So deletions, distortions. Last one then, generalizations. Oh, sorry. Apologies. Yes, we have another poll for you. Are you aware of this one then? Have you been using phrases like, I don't know, when I say no to my neighbours for their shopping, they're going to think I'm a moody git. This one probably possibly a little bit more tricky to notice, but definitely one I'd like you to have a think about. And if you have done it, share it. Share it again with each other. According to who? Yeah, that's a nice one that someone shared here. I use according to who. It works well for me. Sally has just quoted one of my quotes back at me. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. I love that phrase, one of my favourites. We were going to do a whole session on that, but actually it links quite a lot of other stuff. So if you want to look it up, I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with me today. Names have just gone. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. If you type that into Google, there's a ton of really interesting research around it. Actually, when I think something to be true, I seek to prove it. So if I think things are bad, yeah, sorry, Laura's just commented on CBT. Yeah, these are NLP techniques correlate to cognitive behavioral therapy, emotional freedom techniques. They're actually based in, the original work is based in some work by a lady called Virginia Satir, who was a hypnotherapist in the 19th. So definitely worth a look into the background. If anyone wants to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn. You've got my email address. If you want any kind of direction around where to go with this stuff, by all means do contact me. I also know some really good providers of NLP training. That is to get yourself a qualification. I do a lot of training around NLP, but I'm not an accredited centre, so can definitely point you in the direction of that. So. Okay, let's go on to generalizations then. I'm aware that you haven't necessarily had the chance to share in the chat yet, but hopefully you're thinking about these for yourself. Generalizations, as I've said already, are good ways for us to learn. So that's what the first statement says. They're a good way to make general. So I always use the example of a door. So if you get to a door, generally speaking, there's a handle, there's a knob, there's something, twist it, turn it, push it, pull it, door will open. Generally speaking, I know how a door works until I have to go to a hotel and use a credit card to break into the door. What is this all about? What is this? Then you have to remember to put it inside the little thing on the inside of the door. And now, of course, it's second nature. We know that that's how hotel doors work, but that wasn't how hotel doors work. Now if you get a key for a hotel, it's a bit like, what's this? This is weird. So our brains are very good at taking one example of something and generalizing that experience. So we don't have to relearn it, so we don't have to redo it, so we don't have to think about it every single time. The problem, and as it says towards the end of this one, where it's not useful is where we make generalized views or opinions based on 1 or 2 experiences. Now, they will be determined by the language we use. So the language with a generalization is words like always, never, everyone, no one, etc., etc. Sorry, Andy, if you could just share that next one, mate. That's the phraseology we will use. So those of you that are in kind of showers, different controls, you're at don't get me started on hotel showers. The key for me with things like this are around kind of collective thinking, collective mentality. You get a lot of that in work. So I, again, often go in to do team builds and kind of do work with teams that are dysfunctional. And I will get phrases from the team collectively saying, we all think management are rubbish. Well, there's loads of generalizations. So who specifically is we? When you say management, who do you mean? I remember having been a manager myself, and somebody said, management in this organization don't understand us. And even before I understood the principles of NLP, I asked them, so which managers are you talking about? And they did the classic, oh, not you, you're all right. It's all the other managers that are the problem. So generalizations are words that we use that sort of have, well, a generalized application. I don't want to kind of oversimplify it, but that's exactly it. Before and after what? All of us think. Well, who specifically is all of us? Because is it all of us? I once went to work with an organization, and the chief exec said to me, you're going to have a hell's own job here, as we are all suffering from change fatigue. This was an organization of about 2,000 people. So every single one of those 2,000 people. So it's fascinating how language, and somebody's just implying that, can have such a big impact. I talk a lot on training about something, and it's in your handout. We don't have time, unfortunately, to do it at the moment, but something we call presuppositions. Presuppositions are how we use language in a persuasive way, perhaps. Lots of presuppositions being used at the moment in government language. So I don't want to go into that too much, A, for the politics, B, for the fact that it could take us a while, but you've got some information in your handout. And again, if you want to check any of this more information, by all means do pick up the phone, ping me an email, etc. So how do you manage a generalization? Well, you reflect the word back. So if you've got someone saying, I don't know, that Andy's always late for meetings, which he's not, by the way, because he's always in the meeting before I am. What I would be asking that person is, always, literally always, he's never on time? No, yeah, I suppose sometimes. My favourite is where you get that person's always a moody whatever. He said, literally always, they're always moody. Well, most of the time. Well, most of the time is not always then. So what we're looking to do with the generalisation is just kind of get the person to stop and, again, apply logic to the language that they're using. I used to have a friend, still have a friend, but I used to have a friend who was not, sometimes you'd see their name on their mobile, you go, this is going to be a long conversation, going to be lots of emotion, and I'm probably going to end up coaching them, because that's often what my friends hit me up for. They won't admit it, but they do really. And this friend would ring and my heart would sink, and I go, so someone says, always got something to moan about, always got something to kind of be unhappy about. And that then, of course, affects how I pick the phone up. Oh, you've got, oh, great. And then before we know it, we're both in this kind of really unhelpful loop. So two things I did. Firstly, I changed the ringtone so that their ringtone was really cheerful, because that changed my thinking. And secondly, I would say to myself, actually, they don't always moan. They moan a lot, but they don't always moan. And it just gives you that little millisecond in your thinking to just make a different choice. A few of you have referenced this sounds a lot like CBT, absolutely a lot like emotional freedom. For me, it's as simple as there's a situation and I have a reaction. The bigger the gap I can put between the situation and the reaction, the better choice I'm likely to make. The more I react, the more I'm helpful. And that's why this model, for me, links really well with control dartboard. Because if I can apply control dartboard to just stop that train of automatic thinking and then ask some of these questions, that's double power, that's double trouble, that's doubly helpful. So generalizations. I think we got another poll on this one. Yeah. So are you aware of having used always, everyone, no one, never, every time I try and get this computer to work, it takes 20 minutes to boot up. There you go. I could never go vegan. That's a really interesting example. I could never do X, Y, Z. I'm always the first one. I'm always the hardest worker. I never get to find out. And just a couple of minutes, have a think. I would definitely suggest that you've got some information there. So have a look. Share some with us.
ICT never understand.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that a few times.
Yeah.
It's interesting actually. I get that a lot with social workers and business support. So again, I get a lot of that. Well, if only they just don't understand what we're doing. Well, who is they? How do you know they don't? What evidence do you have? What would happen if they did? This just language for me is fascinating because I often describe it as we're a pie. Apologies, you can tell where I get my analogies from. Life is a pie, and language is just the crust of the pie. It doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't tell us what's sitting underneath the pie. Am I getting steak and onion? Am I getting chicken and mushroom? What am I getting? But actually, if you start to dig below that surface, below that language, then you'll get an understanding. Then you'll get to, words like I can't cope. It would be easy to go, it must be terrible. That must be awful. You can't cope. Actually, what does coping mean? How do you define cope? How will you know when you are coping? Otherwise, it's just language. It's just unhelpful rhetoric. Okay, maybe that we're a bit behind. It may be that you're thinking rather than sharing. I know we've had a few. And again, I'm a little bit aware of our time. So just in terms of a kind of final thought, and that this is about as rushed as I've ever done this model. So apologies if it feels a bit kind of scattergun. But I wanted to leave you with a thought that I always think is a version of it that sits with me. So a man is but a product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. You think you can, you think you can't, you're right. And the more one of my favorite analogies that I often use on training is you are your best resource. Absolutely, without question, you are the most powerful resource you have at your disposal. Unfortunately, you can also be your own worst enemy. And for me, what this model is about recognizing what am I doing and what is it resulting in? And if it's resulting in me being miserable, but I'm okay with that, be miserable, be okay with it. But at what cost to you? At what cost to those around you that love you? At what cost to your mental health, your well-being, etc.? So we're going to build on some principles. These were some of the series as we go through. But there is a slide for some further reading. There's loads of stuff out there on NLP. One of my favourites is NLP for Dummies by the Lynn Cooper series. All the For Dummies series is great. Coaching for Dummies, Management for Dummies, Change Management for Dummies, loads of stuff on it. That's just a snapshot. There's tons. So again, if you want to contact me for any information on further reading and also training, be that, qualification type training or just kind of informal stuff. And the last one I think is around just saying thank you. Thank you again for being here. Not quite sure of our numbers today, but I know we added on another 50 people from last time. So thank you for sharing it. Please continue to do that. You'll have the stuff to download. It's yours. If you want to connect with us, if you want to kind of check us out, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. I would just emphasize the feedback. Businesses at the moment, we stand or fall in on our reputation. So if you've got any views, good, bad, indifferent, please do share them. I'd love to hear them. I think that's me, Andy. So over to you. Thank you, folks, for joining us. I'll just hand back to Andy very quickly.
That's brilliant, Lenny. Thank you so much for doing these. I think it's brilliant. We've got a mix of our customers and our connections, and just throwing these on, I think, really hits the mark at the moment. So that's great. You've also made me think how clever S Club 7 were in promoting their parties.
Oh, there is absolutely no party like an S Club party.
Exactly. You are so something, if someone's interested, if anyone's interested, we have another webinar with Beekeeper going on next Tuesday. Feel free to go and have a look. Beekeeper is a tool for enabling organizations to communicate better with their workforce whilst it's dispersed. So really good. Have a look if you're interested. You'll have it in the packs. And thank you very much. And
see you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, see you in a couple of weeks. And, keep that feedback coming in and look after yourselves. Stay safe and see you next time.
Bye, folks. Thank you.